Okay, hello and welcome to my new channel, Economics Made Easy. I decided that for my first video, I would talk about something so important that it can literally be life-changing for those people who aren't overly familiar with the concept. And for those who are, it's always good to remind yourself of the awesome power that is compounding. It's so powerful a force that Einstein allegedly called it the most powerful force in the universe. Okay, so that quote may be apocryphal, but it doesn't take anything away from the power of the phenomenon of compounding. It is so important to know about compounding and have it on your side, because not only can it set you up for financial success and change the lens through which you look at the world, but it can also protect you from the incredibly insidious forces that are the excessive investment management fees that far too many people pay today. We'll come to that towards the end of the video. The knowledge of compounding can also illuminate the reality of investing to those people not fully aware of its importance. It is an unfortunate irony that many people who fear the so-called risky stock market the most and who keep their money in cash or bonds can actually be those most at risk with their money, either by getting hit by inflation or by missing out on the return that they would have got had they consistently invested. So first, a primer. What is compounding? Compounding is where an investment's returns, be they in the form of capital gains or interest earned, are reinvested on top of the original investment for the next period. So you start the next period with a bigger amount, and you then earn a return on this bigger amount and reinvest that return on top again, and so on. One of the most intuitive ways to look at it is through the concept of compound interest. Imagine, for example, that a bank paid you 6% interest on your balance each year. I know that's very hard to imagine in the current low interest rate environment, but let's allow our imaginations to run wild for a moment. Now let's say you put $1,000 into that account. At the end of the year, you would receive $60 in the form of an interest payment. Compounding comes into play for the following year, which, assuming you leave your new total of $1,060 in the bank, you would then get 6% interest on the new total, which means $63.60 for year 2, instead of the $60 you got in year 1, and so it keeps growing exponentially at an ever increasing rate as long as you keep the money in. Okay, so you might be thinking, I wouldn't even get out of bed for an extra $3.60 on $1,000. It doesn't sound all that exciting. You start to see the magic happen when you extend the timeline out a bit. The process is like a snowball running down a hill. It keeps growing bigger and bigger. So let's take that $3.60 and give it to a 20-year-old college student, with the plan being that she invests it for later instead of spending it today. $3.60 is about the cost for a cup of takeaway coffee these days. Well, she's been having a lot of coffee lately, this student. I worry about her. So let's ask her to forego it just for today, so we can use that money to show the power of compounding via investing. So what will we invest in? I'm going to suggest for our example that she invested in a low-cost exchange-traded fund, more on those in future videos, that tracks the S&P 500. The S&P 500 is one of the most popular equity indices, which is basically a basket or a group of the stocks of 500 huge US companies that you can buy into for a lot less money and a lot less effort than buying the 500 companies individually. A quick side note, a lot of people consider the S&P 500 to be overvalued at current prices, but then again, so have many people at almost every time in its history. Let's use it as our example here, but the logic can easily be generalized and extended to other assets or to international stocks or whatever suits your investment goals. So, the historical annual return of the S&P 500 since 1957 is around 8%. For the sake of simplicity, let's assume that that is going to be the return each year for the future. In reality, the market is a lot more volatile than that, and we could get into other more technical measures such as geometric returns, but that's for another video. We'll assume here that we get the average 8% each year from here on out. So our student with her $3.60 decides to invest in an exchange-traded fund and keeps that money in the fund, allowing it to compound all that time until she retires at age 65. She's either really dedicated to helping us demonstrate our example, or has just forgotten she invested it in the first place. We can forgive her for that. She hadn't had any caffeine that day, and so she wasn't at her most alert. So with no further investment, that coffee she forewent would now be worth $114.91 when she retires. That's a pretty expensive coffee, right? Even factoring in the inflation likely to occur between now and then, buying a coffee can be seen as an insane amount of money you're taking away from your future self. Even avocado lattes probably won't cost anywhere near that much in 40 years' time. This is the lens through which a lot of the richest investors view the world when deciding how to spend and allocate their money. Apparently, Warren Buffett understood the phenomenon as early as the age of 10 and used to say things like, "Do I really want to spend $300,000 on this haircut?" Even relatively small purchases can mean foregoing huge sums of money in the future. Although there's potentially little point in looking at every single purchase you make through this lens, lest it detract from your enjoyment of life, it can really guide you in terms of two things. One being the importance of investing in your pension plan from day one, definitely taking your employer up on any offer of matching your contributions if you have that option, especially as these are not taxed the same way as other investments. And the other being consistently investing a portion of your paycheck so as to take advantage of this phenomenon, especially if you are at an early phase in your life. One of the keys is to start early. An amazingly illustrative way to look at this is to picture a guy who saves $1,000 each year from the ages of 18 to 27 and then just leaves the money to sit in his investment account until he retires at 65 without making any further payments. Then another guy comes along, sees our first guy investing, and he also decides to get in on the action. He starts saving at 27, just as the other guy is stopping, and puts into his investment account $1,000 each year from that point. Assuming our 8% return rate from earlier, Guy 1 will end up with $270,000 for when he retires. Guy 2, who in total will have invested over 4 times as much money as Guy 1 by the time they retire, at the exact same rate of return, will end up with just $239,000, which is definitely not a bad spot to be in, but could have been so much better. With compounding, just like studying, it really doesn't pay to procrastinate. Now we come to what I see as one of the most important lessons of the power of compounding for investors, and that is for those who pay money managers a percentage of their invested capital to what is called actively manage their money. In a nutshell, there are 2 ways you can invest your money, passively and actively. Passive investments are like our S&P 500 index mentioned earlier, investing in predetermined indices of assets, where you are essentially buying large swaths of the market at once. The world's most famous active investor, Warren Buffett, himself recommends passive investing for the vast majority of people. Active stock investments are when people, often money managers, try to beat the stock market by selecting stocks they think will outperform their target market. There is a litany of academic evidence against active management, but let's assume here that on average the active manager will make the same returns as the market and that you cannot identify beforehand the skill of an active manager. Therefore, you would expect a given manager to be average in terms of how he or she will perform. A quick digression. Past returns relative to a benchmark for active managers have been a terrible indicator of future performance. Remember S&P from our students' investment earlier. S&P actually release what's called a persistence benchmark, which measures managers' ability to consistently outperform their peers, and it turns out they rarely can. Active portfolio managers typically charge far more than passive funds, primarily for their management fees and also for administration expenses, because they pay more taxes than passive funds, particularly exchange traded funds, and because they tend to trade far more regularly, which brings in what are known as frictional costs. Let's say an active mutual fund manager charges 1% in total, whereas our exchange traded fund from earlier, which tracks the S&P 500, charges 3 basis points or 0.03%. 0.97% of a difference may not sound like that much more to be charged. However, over a lifetime, this can be devastating. Let's say that from the age of 25 to 65, you put $250 a month into your retirement account and realize an 8% return. After fees, your exchange traded fund would leave you with a princely lump sum of just over $865,000. Assuming the exact same return and monthly payment, the active manager would leave you with $656,000. This is over $200,000 less for what seems initially to be a small difference in fees. Again, that is the power of compounding on display. As you can hopefully see, the power of compounding is immense, and understanding and harnessing it can change a person's life completely for the better. It is through the lens of compounding that many of the planet's wealthiest people view the world. It is one of the basic core principles of sound economics and investing that should feature in much of an individual's thinking around the subjects. I hope this video has been of use to you. I'd be delighted if you were to click the subscribe button, and if you have a particular topic you would like me to cover in the future, please leave a comment to let me know.